Okay, well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. And this is a fantastic time to be talking about philanthropy because we're really entering this new golden age of philanthropy with tremendous number of new donors who are coming to the table, often with big amounts of money, tackling just about every kind of challenge you can imagine: education, environment, healthcare. I mean, you name it, you'll find some new donor who's working that issue. We also have a lot of veteran donors who are upping their game and giving more. What you hear, though, if you hang around this world, is that giving away a lot of money is harder than it looks. And so...
We try to make it easy.
And raising money is even harder. So we're going to kind of look at both sides of that picture today. And I want to start by sort of getting the backstory of both of you, of how you got into this area. And start with you, David. So how did you get into philanthropy, and what elements of your personal background really inform your involvement in this?
Well, philanthropy was not something, honestly, I grew up with. My parents didn't graduate from college or high school. My father worked in the post office. He made about $7,000 a year. I was the only child. They gave me the best thing parents can give a child, which is unconditional love, but they didn't have a lot of money to give me, and they didn't have a lot of money to give away in terms of philanthropy. So when I grew up, I was just focused on trying to make my way in the world. And I was, like many people who try to make their way in the world, I wasn't focused on giving away money because I didn't have that much money to give away. And I didn't realize at the time that philanthropy is an ancient Greek word that means loving humanity. It doesn't mean you have to give away money. You can give away your time, your energy, your ideas. So I guess I could have been a philanthropist by giving away my time or my energy. I don't think anybody really wanted my ideas so much at the time. They like your ideas better when you have money. But ultimately what really happened is after I went to work, and my goal in life was to give back to my country. When John Kennedy gave his famous speech at the inauguration on January 20th of 1961, he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." I was in the 6th grade. My teacher went through that speech with me word for word, line for line, and I really realized that this was going to be my calling. I was going to try to go and really make a difference and serve my country, which I thought I could do by going to government. So I ultimately became a lawyer, thinking that would be helpful. I went to work for the law firm in New York City that the man who helped write that speech for John Kennedy worked at, Ted Sorensen. But it was apparent that I wasn't that good a lawyer. The clients told me that all the time. My colleagues said the same. So ultimately, Ted Sorensen helped me get a job with a man who said he was going to be next president of the United States. I could work in the White House and give back. And ultimately, I did work in a campaign for Jimmy Carter, who was 33 points ahead when I entered his campaign. He won by 1 point. So he often wondered what was my contribution. But anyway, White House staffs are obviously filled by people working the campaign. I got a job. I'm 27 years old, Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor to the President of the United States. I wasn't qualified for the job. Nobody was qualified, I thought, the administration, but I didn't stand out for that reason. And ultimately, I got inflation to 19%. Nobody has done that since. We lost the re-election. And I said we couldn't lose to Ronald Reagan because he was 69 years old. Who could elect a 69-year-old person? I'm now 67, and you know, this seems like middle age to me, but at the time, 69 seemed old. So I went back and practiced law. Once again, my client said, "You're not a very good lawyer," and I kind of realized I had to do something else. I started a firm. It took off. And then when I was 54, Forbes magazine had an article about me, and it said what my net worth was. And it seemed an enormous amount of money by any standard, certainly from the standards I had when I was growing up. And I realized I couldn't, really spend all this money in my lifetime unless you're going to just waste your money. And so I either could be prepared to take it with me upon death and be using it like the pharaohs, be buried with your wealth, but there's no evidence you really need it in the afterlife. I could just give it over to my executor and say, do something good with it, and I'll be watching from heaven, but I wasn't sure I'd be in heaven. So I decided I would give it away while I was alive, and assuming I had a normal actuarial life, which would take me into the mid-80s, I would try to give it away while I was alive. And our 3 children, were comfortable with that idea, and so I started the process of beginning to become seriously involved in this area. And then Bill Gates called me around the time he was starting the Giving Pledge, and he asked if I would sign it, and I was one of the 40 original ones to do it. So I got involved in it through that way. It was not through something I was born into, as something I've acquired as an interest in, and now I regard it as the great pleasure of my life, which is giving away money. Not so much giving away the money, but seeing things happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened had I not done these things.
So is giving it away more fun than making it?
Making money is fun, but it's interesting. I employ what I call the mother test. When I was making money, my mother was very proud, I think, but you know, she never called me and said, David, you just sold a company, you made a $100 million profit, great. Or David, you just took your company public, that's great, how much money did you make? She never called me about that. When I started giving away the money, my mother would call me and say, David, I'm really proud of you, you're giving away money, you're doing something useful to help people, you're doing something useful for your life. So I use what I call the mother test. If your mother is calling you up, you're doing something right, particularly if she's a Jewish mother. So
That's great.
I think, sure, you can always I can give away all my money tomorrow, in 1 hour. You can always write a check for the amount of money, but doing it sensibly is not that easy to do because there are no metrics similar to what you have in the business world. You have profit and loss in the business world. You don't really quite have that in the nonprofit world. So making money is, you know, you meet a lot of people who aren't that brilliant, who make a lot of money, so you have to realize it's not that difficult if you really set your mind out to do it. Giving away money intelligently, I think, is more complicated, and there are very few philanthropists who have done it so successfully that they are role models, and I think there are fewer role models in philanthropy than there are really in the business world. Many people have made money in different ways in business, but giving away the money is creatively and usefully and productively is much rarer.
Yeah, I want to come back to that, but first I want to hear about your...
So a little bit of a different story. I guess I came from it, but it doesn't make me a bad guy. So we'll start there. But actually, I have fantastic role models as parents who have always given money, even when they didn't have that much. This was a part of their life. And I think I really learned a lot about giving and making it personal and really understanding the places that you give to. And over the years, as my father was making money, he was giving away less, and then the balance shifted. And he actually said one day, I am having so much more fun giving away the money than I ever did making it. And you know, as a daughter, that's about the most inspirational thing you can hear. And so I have always tried to do what I could, and as I got older, and I also tried to train my kids. I remember, and you know, things start small and they can get incredibly big, but when my kids were little, every 8th day of Hanukkah, I would give them each $50, and I would say, this money is for charity, and you guys get to think about and figure out how you want to do it. Do you want to give the $50 to one place? Do you want to give $5 to 10 places, which is what my younger son always did? But I said, you know, have a strategy, have a philosophy, think about how you want to do this. And when I was able to sell my company, what I really wanted to do was think differently about my life and create a very different balance. And I was very fortunate to be very active at Weill Cornell Medicine and to ultimately become the chair of Weill Cornell Medicine, and also to be very active at Jazz at Lincoln Center and really be focused on the education of kids. And so my role is sort of different because I'm around people that are really thinking about how they want to give and how to maximize it. And I think it is such a transitional time in terms of giving, in terms of how people think about it, particularly in the world of medicine, where there are so many different ways. And you know, we have some incredibly creative overseers. Ellen Davis, for example, who is putting together a Young Investigators Fund and really trying to fund young ideas. So there are just lots of ways to do it where people can be active. It can be gigantic transformational gifts, and it could be smaller gifts that really fund your excitement. And
I want to come back to that as well, but first I just want to stick with the subject of family for a moment, because it comes up a lot in the world of philanthropy. People wanting to involve their kids, and also concerns about leaving money to the kids. And I wonder, in your family, David, have you made a decision that you don't want to leave money to the children, or have you tried to involve them in?
Well, I'd like to have them think that they're not going to get any money, because if they think they're going to get any money, then you know, they may not work as hard. Look, I was a person who worked very hard to get where I am, and I want my children to work very hard, and I'm afraid if I said to them, you're each going to inherit X dollars, they may not be as highly motivated. So I've kept it a mystery from them so that they're hardworking, I hope, and they're still relatively unformed. They're still, feeling their way in the world. But at the Giving Pledge meetings, I think there's more discussion about what you do with your children. There are now 169 people who have signed the Giving Pledge. There were initially 40. And after about 6 years, about 169 people, interestingly, 85 to 90% of them are in the United States, because we have a tradition of philanthropy here, which overwhelms the philanthropy tradition in every other part of the world. When Warren Buffett and Bill Gates went to China and said to the Chinese wealthy billionaires, and there are more billionaires in China than the United States, they said, we'd like to give away 50% of your money. They said, are you crazy? We're not going to do this. Maybe 2%, but not 50%. So it's a complicated thing about what you do with your children. I'd say, I asked Bill Gates once, what are you going to do with your children? And he said, well, I'm going to give them a very small amount of money, maybe $10 million apiece. And then
Warren Buffett, though, is
Warren famously initially was getting nothing. Then
Right.
the second time I asked Bill, he said, well, maybe 20 million. Next time he said, maybe a small percentage of what I have. I said, well, Bill, that small percentage we have is a lot. But I don't think he really figured it out yet, because it's very complicated. I think now when his children are older, they're relatively young, he might involve them in the family philanthropies. I think a lot of the Giving Pledge people have different approaches. One group says, give each child his or her own fund and let them do what they want. Another approach is give each of your children a different fund, but you sit on the board of it, so you guide them, but you don't let them do unfettered things. Or you have a family foundation where everybody is on it, and you can say majority vote, or the parents actually make the decision, but the children kind of learn, and ultimately they'll inherit the foundation. I don't think there's any evidence that one is better than the other. Right. I think they all do good things. I think it really depends on the relationship between the parent and the child. But the most important thing is to explain to the children, as you just suggested, why it's important to do this, why it's important not to just take the money and measure your self-worth by your net worth. There are some people I know who want to see their net worth go up in the Forbes 400 every year, and they measure their self-worth as a person by their net worth. And I think you got to explain to your children that giving away the money is an important thing, but also philanthropy is an ancient Greek word, means loving humanity. It doesn't mean rich people writing checks. So you can help other people by giving your time, your energy, and your ideas. And I try to say to my children, volunteer your time, volunteer your ideas, do things more than just worrying about giving away money, because you can do more productive things by your own ideas. For example, Wendy Kopp is a brilliant person who came up with Teach for America. She had no money when she started. She couldn't raise money initially. To me, she should be listed as a great philanthropist, but when we list philanthropists, we list them by how much money they've given away as opposed to how much good they've done for society. Unfortunately, we should do a better way of calculating what people's contribution to society is, more than by just giving away money.
I'm glad
So
you said that.
the people who give have been getting a lot of attention lately, but of course there's many wealthy people who don't give or don't give much. And I know that part of your work has been trying to
Bring them in.
bring them in. So I'd be interested in, first, any broad reflections on why people don't give more, and then how do you get them to be more involved?
It's interesting. I just want to comment on something you said. I personally think the best gift that a parent can give is for that child to be independent in their own right and have that goal and strive to be independent, but at the same time have a real heart about what they're doing. And that's why the magnitude doesn't always matter. But if you're giving in some way, and I love what you said about Teach for America, because whether you're giving by getting other people to get excited about something, or you're giving your own funds, you're participating in what makes our country great and what I think transforms humanity. So that's sort of first and foremost. I think as it comes to people's giving, I think it's a very personal thing. And I think that people sometimes are afraid. Sometimes they're thinking about, how much do they have? What about their families? What are their needs going to be in the future? And I think it's very much a planning component to it. But at some point, they realize I do have that independence. And I think the most important thing you can help somebody do as they think about that threshold of giving is to really think about what they're passionate about. Because when people are giving money, and they're giving their soul and their ideas, and they're enjoying the people that they're around, and they're learning, and they're feeling how important what they're doing is, the first gift will be here. But the second gift will be here, and the third gift will be there. So helping people navigate what's important to them, I think, is the biggest thing you can do to help somebody who's getting to that place and getting to be ready to make a difference in society.
David, you said when you signed the Giving Pledge, you said that one of your goals in being part of the pledge was to encourage other people to give and be that kind of role model. So Are you out trying to get your fellow, wealthy
Well,
people to give
no,
more?
I'm not, and this is the reason. First, we have in this country roughly 325 million people. And on the face of the earth, there's 7.5 billion people. 169 people have signed this. So it's relatively meaningless in the sense of we're not going to change the world by just 169 people, even if they gave away all their money. What you have to do, and what I'm trying to get the Giving Pledge people to do, is to say, let's focus on people that aren't quite as wealthy as the people who signed the Giving Pledge. Let's say to people that have much lesser sums, you too can be a philanthropist, you too can sign something that's equivalent to the Giving Pledge. So I'm trying to get people in the Giving Pledge organization to focus on people that aren't quite as wealthy, and also to try to get people who are younger. The Giving Pledge people, there are a few young people like Mark Zuckerberg and a few other founders of Facebook that are involved, but a lot of them make me look like I'm young. So there are a lot of older people there, and I want to get people who are in their 20s and 30s to think about philanthropy, because they can have a big impact even if they don't have a lot of money or they just don't have that much time. I want people to give their time, their energy, their ideas when they're younger, because they'll do that through their life and it'll be a more enjoyable life. One of the great pleasures of my life is now what I'm doing. I wish I had done it earlier. I wasn't smart enough to do this. Now I want to get younger people to do it. And I try to tell people when I talk to people about philanthropy, I think that there's a selfish motive for maybe what I'm doing, which is that if you give away money and if you're trying to help other people, you will feel good about yourself. When you feel good about yourself, you live longer. Grumpy people don't live as long. Happy people live longer. And so I think there's
That's been medically proven by
I agree.
Give more and live
give away more, you'll live
longer.
Grumpy people don't live as long. And so I'm happy, philanthropists live a long life. David Rockefeller lived to be over 100 years old. His grandfather, great-grandfather lived to be 97 years old. So people gave away a lot of money and they were very happy about it. So I also think that there's a special place in heaven reserved for people that give away money. Now, I can't prove that, I say to people, but why would you want to take a chance that I'm wrong? So I try to incent people to think that they're actually going to maybe get to heaven and see something good. I'll just make a final comment about why people don't give away money. I can't completely understand it, but there's a person that I didn't really know, I never really met him, named Jack Kent Cooke. He was the owner of the Washington Redskins, a very prominent businessman. He self-made, didn't go to college, and he made a fortune, and he owned the Washington Redskins, a lot of other things. When he died, it turned out he'd given away virtually no money of any consequence in his life, but he created a brilliant foundation that gives away great scholarships now, and it has $1 billion plus. I just wonder why he didn't do that while he was alive, so he could see these incredible kids getting these scholarships now. And I try to say to people, if you want to do something useful, do it when you can recognize what's happening. I often wonder when people get to their 80s or 90s and they say, geez, I wish I had done something earlier. Well, that's a great regret. And I don't want people to get to the end of their life and say, I wish I had done something. I want to encourage people to do it when they're younger.
So, and I think part of that is the institutions, some of the organizations, we all have to do a good job of making young givers or smaller givers feel incredibly good about what they're doing and that there's a real impact. There's a tendency sometimes to celebrate the $100 million gift, but I think through young people's organizations, advisory groups, funds where people can be part of something bigger, that to me is one of the key things, is to make sure you give younger people the opportunity to feel very good about it. And one of the things I think we try and do at Weill Cornell Medicine is to really have a lot of educational programs so that people, as they're giving, they're also learning about all the fantastic science that's going on. It's sort of our way to give back to them, where they can see, what's happening. And I think there's a lot more we can do to continue that. And, I love dealing with my kids with small amounts. They give away slightly larger amounts now, but consistent with the money that they make, but they enjoy it. There's great pride in what they do, and I think that will just continue to develop. And we need to be better at that.
Yeah, nobody gets to their deathbed and says, I wish I had saved more money. I wish I hadn't given away the money that I gave away. Nobody says that. They all say, I wish I had done more. And so I'm trying to convince people they don't wait till the end of their life to try to give it away. Yeah. Do it younger. And I think there's some benefits to society when you give away money. Now, we're still a small drop in the bucket. Even all the philanthropy in the United States is 2% of GDP. It's still, and 40% of that philanthropy given in the United States is given to religious organizations, not to minimize them, but they're churches and other things. They're not quite the same philanthropic things as a hospital or a library and so forth. So we do give away more than anybody else, but still, it's relatively a small percentage of our GDP in the United States, and I think we should ratchet up gradually over a period of time and get more people engaged in this than we really have right now.
Yeah. So speaking of those younger donors, we've been hearing a lot about this new generation of donors, many coming from the tech industry, Mark Zuckerberg, Sean Parker, people like that. And it's said that they want to do things differently, that they're more interested in disruption, that they're more interested in metrics. And I wonder what your experience has been, how much philanthropy is changing as these new donors come along. And it's not just younger donors who often think differently, it's many of these new business donors in general.
You know, we obviously spend a lot of time with New York donors, and so as you can imagine, a big part of that world is the financial world. They're investors, and that's the word that I kind of think about a lot when we think about some of the changes that are happening. Fortunately, we have wonderful donors who continue to love to build buildings and have signs, and that's really important. You can't have scientists unless you have great buildings for them to be in. But what we're seeing now is a lot of donors that get very excited about something that they see, some kind of medical discovery that they think is possible. They talk to a scientist, they have passion for a certain type of cancer, and they see some gateways to that happening. And they really love to fund that type of thing because it's like an investment to them. They understand that, you know, it might come to fruition, it might not, but they're looking at that person closely, they're looking at that science, and they're evaluating, is this the kind of thing that I want to be engaged in? We see that all the time, and one of the reasons that we like to think about these public-private funds is that it really helps people think about this in a more diversified way, you know, where we can kind of help them fund a series of young investigators or a series of potential discoveries.
Right.
And so, yes, we see a lot changing, and a lot of it looks a lot more like the investment culture of New York, and I think it's terrific.
The traditional way that people gave away money, they would, to the latter part of their lives, maybe the latter third of their lives, and they would say, okay, here's a check to a medical school or a hospital or a library or something they were connected to, and they weren't really going to either be on the board or they weren't really that involved in the use of the money. The tradition that's now coming, it's relatively newer, but it's becoming a tradition, certainly with the tech people in Silicon Valley, because they're so much younger and they have enormous amounts of wealth. They don't want to just write a check to somebody else. They want to be involved and say, let's create something different. I don't want to just turn my money over to somebody else. Take Bill Gates as an example. Bill more or less retired when he was 51 or 52 from his company and as a CEO, and he really got involved, and he troops through, you know, Africa or Latin America or Asia, actually seeing what's going on, and he can talk about how the money is being expended better than any scientist practically. And so more and more people want to emulate him, which is to say, create your own structure, get involved deeply, just don't write a check to somebody else. Now, writing a check to somebody else may be okay, and there's a lot of people who are great philanthropists who do that, but the younger people in Silicon Valley, because they've come into wealth in such a young period of time, and they have so much confidence in their abilities, they think they can reinvent philanthropy the way they reinvented one area of technology. Yeah. And I think that's actually a good idea.
But I think they can.
So you're not worried about the hubris there of coming in because you invented some new technology and thinking you can solve complex problems like inner city education?
Well, it's always a mistake to think because you're talented in one area, you can be talented in another area. You know, there is hubris to think because I started a great business, I can also be a great philanthropist. On the other hand, I would be willing to put up with some of that hubris because even if there is some hubris involved, some of those things that they do will probably be pretty good. And so I'm not, you know, I don't think it's a bad idea that they do that. I'd say, for example, Jeff Skoll, who was, I think, the #2 person at eBay and an early signer of the Giving Pledge, he decided that what he wanted to do was to make movies that gave a message out. And he's made a lot of terrific movies that have a theme about giving back to society or other kinds of things that are important. So that's his way of doing something different. There are other people that use different methods, but I applaud the young people for thinking up different methods because what worked 100 years ago or 50 years ago may not work. And I want to just remind people that philanthropy has been around in the United States for quite a long time in some respects. When our country was founded, we didn't have a big government that could afford a lot of things, so we had a lot of volunteer associations. And the libraries, the hospitals, and so forth, they were funded by people giving their time, their energy, and some money. And Benjamin Franklin would raise money, or other people would raise money. When de Tocqueville came here in the 1830s, he said everybody in the United States is a member of a volunteer association. Everybody's volunteering to help other people. We don't have that in Europe. And that tradition has really continued, but after World War II, it kind of died a bit. What happened was when the great robber barons of the late 1890s or so, started giving away money, John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Frick, and so forth. We kind of gave away money, and they did a pretty good job. But then World War I came, and between World War I and World War II, we weren't as wealthy as a country, weren't as many wealthy people. And then after World War II, we were focused on some other things. And then really in the I guess it was 80s or so, maybe 90s, Ted Turner said, what about all you wealthy people? What are you doing? You're doing nothing. And so he made a very famous $1 billion pledge to the UN Foundation that he helped to create. And other people got inspired by him. You know, I think Bill Gates would say that he got inspired by Ted Turner. Ted Turner's an original signer of the Giving Pledge. The point being that a lot of people who were wealthy weren't doing as much until somebody said, hey, you guys should be doing much more than you are. And it kind of revived the whole philanthropy gene in the United States. And I think it's now a very good gene, and it's in pretty good form, but it can still get much better.
But I think most philanthropies, the actual cultural institution would say to you that good private participation is incredibly helpful. I mean, most of these organizations run on, you know, a pretty slim budget, and to the extent that people can come in with their money and with their good ideas and really care, particularly when they check their egos at the door, which is a very positive thing when they're dealing with this. But if they come in with great ideas and help on the management, help on the recruiting, you know, really be there, open up their homes so that people can come over and have dinners and spread the knowledge and the wealth, it is so warmly accepted to have that participation and not just a check. Right. And there is a point where it can go too far, and I acknowledge that. I think.
So what is that point? I mean, when do donors, because we hear a lot about these hands-on donors, they have big ideas, they want to do things differently, and sometimes they go off and do their own things, but sometimes they come charging into existing institutions that have their own ways of doing things. And when does it become like, whoa, wait a minute?
I think that's part of the role of a chair. And part of the role of the organization is to really sit down with donors and to really understand what they want, what their objectives are, because everybody is so different now. There is no one size fits all in this world. To really understand what their desires are. And you got to listen carefully, because if you don't feel that the organization can handle what they're thinking, it might not be the right partnership. And you know, I can say that New York has some very, very interesting people in it. And they're not all overseers, they're not all on our board, because we just wouldn't be the right organization for them. So you really, not all money is great money. That's, I know, a very broad statement, but if somebody isn't going to play with the team, if it's going to be divisive, if it's, you know, going to be about their ego and not the institution, yeah, you got to really think about it. But I'd say 80% of the time, you are getting free help in a way for an organization that they couldn't get. It's legal, it's accounting, it's governance, it's people that they know around the country that they can help you recruit. I mean, it's fantastic to see that private-public partnership.
There are four ways you can look at it. In large philanthropic organizations, they have large development teams, and they're pretty professional, and you know, it's a real skill to kind of, you know, separate somebody from their $100 million or their $500 million or whatever it might be, or even in some cases $1 million or $500,000 or $5,000, whatever it might be. But you have four different situations. One is the donor shows up and says, here's what I want to do with the money. And in that kind of situation, you can say, yes, we want the money, we need this money. Another kind, the donor shows up and says, I want to do this, and the organization really doesn't want it. And they just don't want to do that. And so you have to persuade the donor that's not a good thing. Another time, the organization will show up and say, this is what we need. And they have to convince a donor that that's the appropriate thing for the donor. And then last, sometimes the organization is thinking about something, and the donor might actually have a similar idea, and they can work out something that kind of meets their needs. I think my own experience is that, you know, organizations probably know better than the donors what is most helpful to the organization. But sometimes donors, just because they're wealthy doesn't mean that they're not smart. And so sometimes donors actually have good ideas. And so sometimes they think of things that maybe other people didn't think of in the organization, and you can persuade an organization it might be good for them.
Yeah. So in terms of setting priorities, many people, when they start out giving, can feel pretty overwhelmed. I mean, there's a tremendous number of things that you could support. It's hard to know what nonprofits are most effective. What advice would you give for people kind of coming into this space for the first time?
Go ahead.
Well, I just, you know, for me, I think there were my early years where I got involved in a lot of things. And that's probably not the most effective thing, but I think it was probably good for me to kind of see where my passions were. And then over time, I really honed it to two subjects, one being medicine and academic medicine and discovery, and the other is kids, particularly through reaching out through the arts. And that's where I live, that's where I stay. But there's a third, which is I support things that my friends are passionate about on their behalf, because I feel that, when they're really excited about something, particularly if I can see some combination to my world, I want to be there for them. I think that's extremely important to me, but I have kind of felt that I needed to be much more narrow because, nothing is infinite. And that's also where I could give my time and my money. And it just feels right to me.
Well,
And
I
your agenda
analogize
has
it to
been
the
pretty
work. I analogize it to the what you do when you work. People that create great companies and do great things in business usually are doing them because they found something they really love, and they build these companies almost regardless of how much money they're going to make. If you have a great idea and you're working and you love what you're doing, you're probably going to ultimately be successful. People that win Nobel Prizes or create great companies don't do it because they hate what they're doing. You have to love what you're doing. Nobody won a Nobel Prize hating going to work every day, 9 to 5. They couldn't wait to get home. They want to work around the clock. And that's true of people that like Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. They all love what they're doing. The amount of money that they're making was almost irrelevant. The same thing is applying, in my view, in the philanthropy world. You have to find something you love. If you hate a given area and you have to write checks and every time you write the check you can't stand it because you don't like this particular thing, it's not really going to lead to much and not going to make you live longer because you're not going to feel good about yourself.
You're grumpy again.
Right, you're going to be grumpy. But also, you're not going to really, I think, get into the spirit of what you should be doing. So find something you really enjoy. Find something that you has a personal connection to you. And you can't, as you say, do everything. Find one or two things. Now, in my own case, people come to me, I get roughly $50 million of requests a week, and I can't honor them. But I have to figure out what it is that I'm going to do. And so I do many different things, and I support lots of organizations, but I try to find things where my money will get something started that wasn't otherwise going to get done, or my money will complete something that wouldn't otherwise get done or get completed. And I have a personal interest in it so that I'm interested in learning more about it, and I have a personal connection, either my family or I have either some connection to the organization or have a personal interest in it intellectually. And I think you've got to have something that you really enjoy and want to feel like you can accomplish something. Now, I make everybody laugh by, maybe they won't laugh, but I say, suppose I told you you were, I was going to give you $100 billion. You have Bill Gates' problem. You have $100 billion. All right? So as soon as I give you $100 billion, what are you going to do with it? Well, you're going to go buy a plane, a couple homes, and so forth, but you got 99.9 left. What are you going to do? What are you going to do with the other 99.9? Well, that's the problem that Bill Gates really has. What are you going to do with all that money? And he decided that he would try to tackle problems that are much bigger than the things that I can tackle because I don't have his level of wealth. So he is not just saying, what can I do that I can see accomplish in my lifetime? He's thinking in bigger terms. So he's trying to tackle the healthcare problems of the emerging markets or Africa or Latin America or so forth, or K-12 education in the United States. Those are gigantic problems. I'm not even sure Bill has enough money to solve those problems. He can make a dent, but not solve them. I'm looking to kind of say, hey, I got this done. So if, let's say the Washington Monument has an earthquake damage, I'd say, look, I can fix that up. It'll get done while I'm alive. I can fix that. That's something I can get my hands around. If I say, I want to solve the problems of literacy in the United States, and I give a fair amount of money to that, but I know I'm not going to, by myself, solve the problems of illiteracy in the United States. 12% of the people in the United States are illiterate. I don't have enough money to solve that problem. I can make a dent in it, but I try to find a small niche in that literacy area that maybe I can make a dent in. But I try to find things where I can actually see some progress while I'm likely to be alive, and that's one of the standards I use.
By the way, you mentioned the Washington Monument. Many people in the audience probably don't know the backstory of you stepping forward to contribute to help that.
Well, when I'm the chairman of the Kennedy Center, as you heard, and on the board of it is an ex officio is the member of the National Park Service. So I was out of town one day, and Washington, D.C. had an earthquake. Washington doesn't have a lot of earthquakes, so it was unusual. And the Washington Monument was damaged a bit. And the Washington Monument, many of you have probably been there, it's 555.5 feet. It took about a typical Washington project, it took 50 years to build it. And as you may know, if you've been there, the first third is one color and the top 2/3 another color because they ran out of money in about 1850 and they stopped building it and they didn't finish it about 1880. And it's that high because the ancient Egyptians, when they built obelisks, realized that they fall over if they're more than 10 times the size of the base. So the base was 55 feet, so they went up 555.5 feet. They had some earthquake damage, so I called the head of the Park Services on the Kennedy Center board and said, look, how long is it going to take to fix that? He said, it's going to take a couple years. I got to get Congress. It's complicated. I said, tell you what, forget Congress. I'll put up the money. He said, what? I said, just put it. He said, I don't know what it costs. I said, I assume you can, I can manage it. So just get the money and get the work done. He then called me back a couple weeks later and said, David, I'm really happy with your gift, but the Congress feels they get no credit for doing anything. Can they put up 50% of the money? I said, okay, fine. So they put it up. And actually, I went, when we were doing it, the scaffolding was put up there. Some of you may have seen in Washington. It was beautiful scaffolding. It had LED lighting around it. President Obama said to me a couple times, he said, I look at it every night from my porch and keep the scaffolding up because I love the LED lighting. I said, well, you have to take the scaffolding out at some point. But at one
Did you
point,
pay to get it lit?
Yes. So the scaffolding was there, and one day they said, would you like to go to the top? And you'll never get a chance to be on the outside of the Washington Monument. And I said, well, okay. So I get there one morning, and the Secretary of Interior is there, and she said, I'm a mountain climber, and I would be humiliated to take this elevator up on the scaffolding. Let's climb up. I said, well, I'm not a mountain climber. And she said, I've climbed Mount Rainier 7 times. And I said, well, I've flown over Mount Rainier 7 times. And so I said, all right, I'll climb up with you if there's a defibrillator somewhere, because I'm not in such good shape. So they found a defibrillator, and they said, we're going to hook you up. I said, well, if it's so safe, how come you have to hook me up? But okay, so I'm climbing. I get there. She got up in about 20 minutes. About 4 hours later, I get to the top. But when I got to the very top, nobody is looking around. The Secretary of Interior is looking this way. The head of Park Service is looking this way. So I took out my initials, and I put my initials on the top. So if you get to the Washington Monument top, you'll see my initials there. But
So who's going to volunteer to climb?
and I just to add the postscript on that, I found the amount of money that I put up on that is modest relative to other things I've done. I got more attention for that gift than anything I'd ever done. And I've given very large sums to universities and medical centers and so forth. But it's amazing that what happened there is people said, this should be done by the government. Why is this person doing this? Why is he doing it? Why isn't the government doing it? And there are many reasons, but I realized that there were many other things the government could do if they really wanted to, but maybe they're not going to do. And so I decided to start doing things where the government maybe could do it, but isn't really doing it, and maybe I could generate some interest in other people. So I call this patriotic philanthropy, where I'm trying to give back to the country to kind of remind people of our heritage by fixing monuments or memorials or buying historic documents like the Magna Carta and giving them to the country, to try to remind people of the importance of our heritage, the good and the bad. And I try to make sure that when I helped redo Monticello or Montpelier, the slave quarters were built out so people knew that Thomas Jefferson, for all of his great strengths, was a slave owner, and James Madison the same, and Mount Vernon the same. And so I try to make people learn more about American history, because one of my obsessions is that people know so little about it. Right now, less than 50% of Americans can name the 3 branches of government. And 30% of Americans in a recent survey thought that Larry Summers was the first Treasury Secretary in our country, which he's not. And then it turns out another survey of high school sophomores, more high school sophomores can name the first 3 names of the 3 Stooges than the first 3 names of any founding fathers. And amazingly, in another survey recently, 10% of Americans said that Judge Judy was a member of the United States Supreme Court. It's not the case. So I do think that by doing these things and trying to remind people of American history, maybe people will visit these memorials and monuments, and if you do that, they might learn more about history. One of the great things about museums and monuments and memorials is this. Everything that I'm doing in that area or anybody else is doing, you can see it on a computer screen today. You can sit in your home and see everything that I'm doing, or every artifact or every document. But it turns out that the human brain still works in a way that when you go visit the original Magna Carta or the original copy of the Emancipation Proclamation, you go back and you tend to read more about it, and you're more interested and more likely to learn. And so that's one of the reasons I'm trying to do this, is to get people to learn more about our country's history, on the theory that, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, if we have more knowledge about our country's history, maybe we'll have a better democracy, and if we have a better democracy, maybe the country will be better off. And that's why I'm trying to do that.
So, Jessica, I want to put the question to you about kind of philanthropy's role vis-a-vis what government does, because you're in a field where government has been historically, the last 50 years, played a very significant role funding medical research. And lately, that medical research has been flattening out. There's a possibility that it could go down. But long-term, looking forward, it's unlikely to go up. And I wonder where you see philanthropy, what's the appropriate role of sort of philanthropy stepping forward to doing things that government once did and many believe should do?
So I'll answer that in a couple of parts because I think you're right on. First of all, I think in terms of medical research, you're in this sort of golden time where between big data and all the information that's out there, we're about to make some really transformational discoveries. And that's right when we do see the condensing of the NIH and many of the others. And so philanthropy plays an enormous role. And fortunately, I think for all of us, the discoveries and what the scientists are thinking about is so exciting that it really does get people sort of jazzed up about the possibility of investing. But there's another piece of it too, because if we can really fuel these great ideas and great discoveries from our scientists who are spending time with the physicians who understand the patients and our great medical students, and that's sort of the hallmark of an academic medical center, then hopefully we can be part of creating entrepreneurial businesses, medicines, devices, things that will really take all of this great research and all of this patient understanding we have and bring it right back to the bedside in the treatment of patients. So I believe that philanthropy can fuel a lot of discoveries, but also fuel a lot of new businesses that these scientists will be behind that will also create more money to keep the system going. So the slowing down.
What's the best way for philanthropy to cut in here? I mean, the NIH still is spending $38 billion a year, thereabouts, and philanthropy is a very tiny
It's a small piece
sliver.
of it.
So what's the best way to deploy that sliver?
So that's why we're sort of exploring some different areas. I mean, one interesting area to me is our young investigators. So you think about the wealth that's in these young hands and how these young people think so differently. Our young investigators are brilliant, and very often there isn't the funds for them. They really don't have the access to the NIH. Hopefully from us and other great institutions, they're being well mentored. They're really, have ideas that are worth exploring. That's an area where philanthropy can be incredibly helpful. Then there, you sort of keep going out in the spectrum. There's something called the valley of death, where you're in between where a drug company would be interested, the NIH isn't there yet, but there's a really good idea, and it's $150,000, $200,000 before you can actually begin to think about doing something with mice or other trials. There's so much room for philanthropy to take these great ideas and to listen to scientists and really push the idea along to see whether there's something that could come out of it. So it's an amazing place for philanthropists, and that's one of the reasons I like the concepts of working on more fund ideas. Is so, there are going to be ideas that hit it big, and then there are going to be a lot that were good ideas that were worth chasing, but they're not going to do it. So a little bit of a diversification, in fact, of the investment, I think, makes a lot of sense. But we're going to see brilliant entrepreneurial things coming out of these academic medical
I agree.
centers.
The way I look at it is that if you analogize it to business, you have some great companies that do wonderful things, J.P. Morgan or IBM or Procter & Gamble. They're relatively large organizations, and moving them is not that easy. The entrepreneurs are often coming up with new ideas that kind of are going to change those larger companies and come up with new ideas, and maybe those companies will adapt, but they're going to be the innovators often. And the same thing is true in philanthropy. The government of the United States, the NIH is a wonderful organization. Dr. Francis Collins runs it. He's done a terrific job. He's been reappointed by President Trump, and so he's terrific. If both President Trump and President Obama agree on anything, it's that they agreed on Francis Collins. So, but the people that come in with philanthropic gifts, they are the people that are the entrepreneurs. They're the ones that can get things done that maybe the larger staid organizations like the NIH can't quite do. So I think there's a real role for it, and I think it's a mistake to think that government can solve all problems. And there are some people who think that there should be no philanthropy, and that all philanthropists should go away because all we're doing is steering things to our priorities, not the people's priorities. And I think that's a mistake, but that's a view that some people have.
Right. Well, I did want to raise that question about the power of philanthropy in a democratic society. There's a lot of concern about these so-called super citizens, as I dub them in my own book, of people who have tremendous resources, a sense of hyper-agency, great sophistication for pulling the levers of influence, at a time when many ordinary citizens are feeling disenfranchised or feeling that they don't have much say in our society. So I'm interested in that question, how it's playing out in a city like New York, where you have big philanthropic projects that are literally helping remake the landscape, whether it's the High Line or what's happening in Roosevelt Island, or at the national level where you have think tanks playing a tremendously influential role in shaping national policy.
Well, obviously, you can't conflate a democracy where everybody has the right to vote and everybody has theoretically an equal opportunity or should have an equal opportunity with the idea that people that have acquired great wealth should also be exactly the same as people that don't have great wealth in terms of their ability to do things. So I don't think a democracy means that everybody has to have exactly the same opportunity to influence other people. If you are Leonard Bernstein and you're a great conductor and you're a great a composer, should we say, well, you shouldn't be more influential in the music world than the average person? Obviously not. And in the other world of philanthropy, some people that have wealth are going to be more influential people that don't, but I think experience shows that generally, with some exceptions, people that give away money and do these kind of philanthropic things are benefiting society, and I think that the cases of abuse are relatively modest compared to the cases of things that have been done well. So I think on balance, I think we shouldn't see that everybody has to be exactly equal in every single thing, and some people will have more influence, and probably that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, when you think about philanthropy going into the arts and the amount of access that's given because of it, I mean, who's on the high line? Everybody is, and it's wonderful. And if we can really make some of those great changes in healthcare, I assure you it will impact everybody, no matter what their wealth is. In fact, one of our big things at Weill Cornell is really studying the disparity of healthcare between those that are in cities like New York and those that are in Alabama or upstate New York, and what can be done to really change that dynamic. Mm-hmm. So when you bring philanthropy in, I think the purpose is to really create so much more opportunity for everyone. And I'll just give you just a little thing on jazz at Lincoln Center, for example. I love the jazz, but what I get so excited about is knowing that these inner city schools have jazz bands where the kids are participating and their confidence is building, and they do competitions and they're paid attention to, and they're realizing their talents and kind of getting out of the tough part of inner city life and expressing themselves through music, and whether it's music or baseball or whatever it is, that is changing. I mean, the philanthropy changes opportunities. I think it creates more opportunities. I don't generally, with some exceptions, it doesn't hinder opportunities.
And you never know what is going to get the most attention, or just like an entrepreneur who starts his or her company that doesn't know if it's going to turn out to be Facebook or Microsoft. You don't know what philanthropic idea you might have might inspire other people to do things, or might actually turn out to be a great thing. I think when Wendy Kopp started Teach for America, she didn't realize it probably would actually transform education in some ways. Sometimes I've done things I didn't think would get that much attention. I didn't design to get attention. I thought I was helping somebody. I'll just mention one that gets more attention than anything I've done. Well, it's the modest amount of money. I'm a chairman now of the Smithsonian, and we own the National Zoo. And it turns out that the National Zoo rents pandas from the Chinese. And we have to rent them for roughly $1 million a year. And when Mao Zedong gave Richard Nixon 2 pandas in 1972 after his historic visit, they were gifts. But now the Chinese rent these pandas to 27 zoos around the world. It turns out the pandas are the most popular species on the face of the earth. There are 7.5 billion of us, but there are only 1,600 pandas in the entire world. And people seem to obsess over these pandas. And so we ran out of money at the Smithsonian, so I put up some money, wasn't all that much, to make sure that we could keep the pandas. And I learned something about pandas, and it turns out, when the government has a shutdown in Washington, D.C., nobody calls up about their Social Security check being late. They call up that the panda cam is shut down so people can't see the pandas. Now, why do we have so few pandas? Well, this is something I got dug into. Why do we need this money? Well, the Chinese use this money to help pandas reproduce. And it turns out that the female panda goes into estrus, can reproduce only for 4 hours a day, 1 day a year. So think about how few people there would be if people could only do this 4 hours a day, 1 day a year.
Maybe
so how does this
think
work?
About that.
Well, in the wild, what actually happens is the female leaves a signal that says, in 3 weeks, I'll be ready for my 4-hour period of time. The male picks it up. He leaves a scent on the tree saying, I'll be there 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week, 1 week. They come together. But if you only do this 4 hours a day, 1 day a year, you don't know where the parts are supposed to go. So they fumble around a lot. In the captivity, they show movies of pandas mating. They call it panda porn. It's designed to give them the idea of what they're supposed to do. I analogize this to members of Congress. Members of Congress know what they're supposed to do, but they don't know how to do it, and sometimes the pandas have the same thing. But you can't believe how many people care about pandas, and I know that Congresswoman from New York is trying to get pandas in the New York Zoo.
Yes.
There are only 4 zoos in the United States that have pandas, but if anybody ever looks at a panda again, feel sorry for them because they have a hard time reproducing, and they'll probably be extinct in about 50 years unless we do something about it.
Go Pandas.
More than you wanted to know about
So,
pandas.
So we have some questions here from the audience, and two of them are about
Pandas.
two of them are about raising money and how to approach philanthropists most effectively, and what advice both of you might have for nonprofits who are hustling after those grants.
I chair now 6 national capital campaigns, or co-chair, and so, if Einstein's definition of insanity was to be reformulated, it would be chairing 6 capital campaigns simultaneously, because you're asking for money for all the time. You run the risk of losing all of your friends or not making any friends. I think asking for money is an art and a skill, and it's different. In the business world, when you ask for money, you're giving people something that, there are 3 types of ways you can ask for people for money. You can ask people for money in the philanthropic world, where you're saying, people, give me money and you'll get to heaven, or you'll be happier, or you'll solve the problems of the world. That's very hard to do, because some people say there's no measurement, it's very ephemeral. The other ways you ask for money are relatively easier. If you ask people for money in a business context, you can promise them you'll get a certain profit, or maybe they'll think they'll get some money, or you can ask them for a political gift, and there it's a relatively modest sum, and maybe they think they're buying some access or something. But in philanthropic, it's much harder, and I think the biggest gifts come from peer-to-peer asking. It's not likely the development officer is going to get a $100 million gift from somebody. That has to be done by the president of the organization or the chairman of the board. So you have to do what's called cultivation, and you spend a lot of time. And when you read about $100 million gifts or $500 million gifts, they don't come about overnight. It's very rare. They usually take many, many years of cultivation before they come about. So it's an art and a science, and it takes a lot to get this money done and get this money raised. And I think the development officers that do it are very skilled, but in the end, you've got to get the peers asking other peers for these large gifts, I think.
And you have to really kind of understand the need and really match it up to the donor. And I think that's an area too where things are changing. When I think about some of the big gifts that we've gotten, it's almost like an RFP process, or the process that one would go through with the NIH. People really want to understand how the money's going to be used, who is the talent that's going to be behind it. They are very hands-on. It's not just putting their name on it. It's really an exceptional commitment, both on their part and on our part. And I think it's actually very exciting to be a part of some of these gifts, and it does take a long time, but we don't really promise them heaven, but we really do promise them an incredible experience of watching transitional things happen, and they'll be a part of it. And it's just so rewarding for people, and those gifts are out there. And I think it's probably a little bit tougher in today's world on the capital side, on just the building side,
Right.
which was probably where things were 15 or 20 years ago. I think people want to have a cancer center or a metabolic center. They really want to be a part of that. And we need to do both. I mean, one of, I think, the big issues, for example, with the National Institute of Health, the NIH, is that they're doing a great job and they're focused on funding, but they're really thinking of contracting the administrative expense. And you just can't have these great outcomes without the administrative support behind it. So we really try and balance and make sure people understand the full extent
I
of
would
the gift.
just add, to add to that, when the first PhDs were given in like 1066 in Bologna, the requirement was that you be able to speak 2 foreign languages in addition to your native language. And that's been around for a long time. They should have said you should take courses in fundraising, because PhDs and MDs and other graduate degree people, they spend half their life asking people for money. I mean, how many people here have been asked for a philanthropic, a political, or a business gift or a contribution, or been approached by somebody for money in the last 30 days? Anybody
30
been
seconds.
30 days? Or how many people have asked other people for money? Okay. And when you ask other people for money, how many of you say, "I'm sorry to ask you for money"? Because very often
Never.
people do that. I don't say that, because if I was sorry, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
I actually tell them I'm doing them a favor. They may not agree with that, but that's what I tell them.
So one frustration you'll hear a lot is that just about getting in the door, fundraisers complain about not even knowing who to call, or how. So with you, I mean, what gets your attention?
Well, look, I get approaches all the time, and I realize now people call me all the time and they say, and I guess when I'm on the other side, I use the same technique. It doesn't work that much, I realize, but say, I'd like to have your ideas. Well, when people call me and they say they want to see my ideas, I realize they really want my money. And so I say, look, I don't want to embarrass you by having you fly in from California and make a presentation, and I can tell you I'm just not interested in this area. So if you're really interested in my ideas, let's do it on the telephone. We can just get it done on the telephone, but it save them the embarrassment of doing all the things. Because if somebody agrees, if somebody's going to ask you for money, and you agree to have the meeting, they presume you wouldn't have had the meeting if you weren't modestly interested. And so I try to not have meetings if I'm not really likely to do something, because otherwise I don't embarrass people, waste their time and so forth. When I'm on the other end of it, I try to be upfront and say, look, this is something we're trying to do and we'd like you to consider a gift, but we recognize you're not going to make a decision right away, let's talk to you about it. But I try not to mislead people and let them think that I just want their ideas when I really want more than their ideas.
Right.
But we all know people too, and I think you try and spend time with people in a social setting and get to understand them. And then, I do think the development offices are absolutely critical, because there's always that background research that kind of helps you understand what their interests are. And then, to me, the conversations happen over time. And you really see that there's something there, or they realize how excited you are about what you're doing, and they say, oh, can I see something? Can I understand what you're up to? The other thing I think is very important are the boards. We call ours an overseer board, trustees, whatever it is. The people that you bring together, not only do they have sort of this inside track to get excited and to do more things than they ever thought, but they know people, and you just keep growing that circle from people who are very excited about it. And I think one of the challenges, and we've been very focused on it, is that some of these boards, particularly of institutions that are larger and well established, are older. And so part of the challenge, and I think where the growth is to bring in younger people to these boards also, who have different experiences and who can get excited about this and who represent kind of that new mode of philanthropy. And when you see them all together in the room engaged, because every board you can have 60, but there are going to be 30 that are really engaged. When you see them together, bouncing ideas off of each other, talking about things, or when they did their first gift, how it felt, it just creates this amazing environment. So the more you can create environments, the better you are.
I think on a board, I often tell some of the boards I see, I say, you want to increase your board and giving, get more people who are on it who are Jewish. Because Jews give money, Jews give disproportionately. And I've seen some boards where the person will say, well, we can't raise any money. I look at the board, it's all, somebody the third or somebody the fourth on the board. And, I don't see any Schwartzes or Goldbergs or things like that.
Bibliowigs.
That's what they need. They need those kind of people on the board. If you populate the board with some more people who are Jewish, you'll raise more money. I tell them that all the time.
Probably true.
Well, Inside Philanthropy has a guide to top Jewish funders for anybody who's interested. So a question here about recognition, and this is tied to the issue of fundraising. How important is recognition to you? How important is it in terms of kind of landing some of these larger gifts to fundraisers?
Well, it's clear. There was an ancient Jewish philosopher in the Middle Ages who said the greatest philanthropy is done with anonymity, but he didn't have to raise money. So I think there's no doubt that people like to see their name, and I'm not unfamiliar with that myself. So there's no doubt that people like to say, I did something, and this is a way of getting their word out that they've actually done something useful. I think it can inspire other people. Like in my own case, I came from the modest circumstances, and if I'm giving away money, it says to people, somebody from modest circumstances can rise up and give back to society, and I view what I'm doing as giving back to the country, really, in many cases, that made it possible for me to do this. So I think some recognition is possible, but sometimes I decide to give things anonymously because I don't want attention for some things, or I just, don't really want to be as identified with it, or I know if I give it to this cause, I'll get an enormous amount of other calls from similar things which I don't want to get involved with. So, I think recognition is important to most people, and I'd say very often, the gift can fall down because if the recognition isn't adequate.
I think all you have to do is go to York Avenue or go into any of our medical buildings or go into any hospital and you'll see a name here and a name there and a name there. So it is very important to people and we respect it. And as the gift is in process, and again, our development people are amazing, we're working with them to show them what the possibilities are and whether they can get excited. But we're also learning how to help them name discoveries also. So not just buildings, not just real estate, and doing a really good job of creating PR around the new XYZ center that can, advance some form of science. So giving people name recognition and donor recognition, I think, can happen in a lot of different ways, not just real estate. And I think it's going to be important to keep exploring that. Personally, I'm very quiet. I actually don't. It's just not my thing. But I've certainly grown up around people that love to have their names on things, and that's great. I think my problem is Bibliowix has too many letters, but so nobody could spell it anyway. But it's a very personal thing, and part of it has to do with my relationship with the kids and how we look at things. But there's so many ways that you can help people feel that recognition. One of the things, and I alluded to this before, that concerns me, because I think the growing of giving is so important, is that sometimes when you get caught up in gifts that are $1 million and $5 million and $10 million and $100 million, you don't get as caught up in the smaller gifts, and that could actually be a bigger portion of somebody's earnings and so critical to them, and actually in some way groundbreaking. And we have to learn how to give the right recognition across the board where it's appropriate. So it's not just the biggies.
I first gave money for a building at my alma mater, Duke University. I'm now the chairman of the board there, and it's a great school. But at the time, I had what I call the WASP way of recognizing people's names. So when we had this dedication, and my mother and father showed up, and I said, this building is named after me. And they looked all around. They said, David, we don't see your name anywhere. I mean, where is it? And I asked the people, I said, where's the sign? They said, well, we don't really like to put up signs. We just kind of call them this, but we don't like to put up signs. It kind of gets in the way.
And that would not work in New York.
Right. So there's another school, I won't mention it, another school in the Ivy League where they have neon signs practically. You put your name up, and your name is, if you give money, your name is going to be in neons and you can't miss it. Now, some of you may have seen at Lincoln Center, and I was vice chair of Lincoln Center. I was having their capital campaign. And they were trying to redo what later became the atrium there, where you could buy tickets or something like that. And we had a very prominent New Yorker who we wanted to give the honor of giving the money for that. And he looked at it, and he kind of said, geez, this isn't really significant enough, and nobody will see my name or something. So in the end, we couldn't get him to do it. In the end, I did it. And I didn't pay much attention to it. And the next thing I know, the person who's ordered the sign has ordered these signs that are the letters are this big. So you go by the David Rubenstein Atrium, and they put the signs on both Broadway and 7th Avenue, and it's like it's embarrassing because it's that big. It wasn't that big a gift. The person who was supposed to get the gift, or give the gift, called me a couple times and said, David, if I'd known the letters were going to be that big, I would have given the money.
That's funny.
All I can say is signs are cheap, so if you have to do it, do it.
They didn't offer to name the Washington Monument after.
Yeah.
You can't get any recognition from the National Park Service.
So a final question, and it's an interesting one. You are both investment-minded, and supporting international development causes can offer high returns on the donor dollar. What has given you pause, if you've had pause, in being more supportive of international development?
You mean giving money outside the United States?
Yes.
If I had the money of Bill Gates, I might look at it. But my money is modest compared to that. So I came, again, from circumstances where I never thought I would be where I am today. I have enough money to do some things in the United States. I just can't tackle all the things around the world, all the problems. I have given some money to some university-related things in China or other parts of the world, but generally 95% of my money is going to the country where I reside, where I raise my family, and with my wife, and where I think I have the greatest obligation. But there are some foreign countries, obviously Israel and some other countries, but most of my money is going to the United States.
Any thoughts on the global dimension of?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I think medicine is global. And I think that investing in medicine will impact the world, particularly if you're focused on things, not just but infectious diseases. I mean, there's so many things. So I think what I'm doing is, in fact, quite global. And I'm also very proud of the amount of research that we do around the world, and also the collaborations that we do around the world. But what I love is being close to what's happening, and seeing it kind of stem from here and go from there. And so it's kind of nice to be part of the New York community, but at the same time knowing that this work is going to impact globally. So it's kind of a nice balance for me.
So last question, just to wrap up. Where's all this leading? I mean, there's trillions of dollars in wealth that is going to be coming into philanthropy over the next decades. That's what the experts tell us. Do you see a kind of supersizing of the sector, or do you think it's going to be sort of business as usual, but it's sort of incrementally more donors coming in? And what do you think is most sort of exciting about this new golden age that we're living in?
Well, remember, we have increasing income inequality, so the wealthy people are getting wealthier. Right now in the United States, 1/10 of the upper 1% earn 10% of the income. So as the wealthier get wealthier, they have to do something with their money. And there's just a limited number of art things they can buy or homes they can buy. So they are going to give away dramatically higher sums of money. Still, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the resources the government has, but I think philanthropy will go forward. I think what we need to do is convince people that philanthropy doesn't mean just giving money, and you don't have to be very rich to do it. Encourage everybody to do it. You've got to get middle class people, middle class income people to give a little bit as well. They can have much greater impact. If an average middle class person is giving 2 to 5% of their income away, in the end, that's going to be more money than the wealthy people giving away money, because there's so many more people in the middle class. And that's what I hope we can do. And convince people that philanthropy is an American thing, it's an American tradition, and again, that it's a thing that'll help you live longer because you'll feel better about yourself. And convince people of that, I think ultimately we'll have much more philanthropy and the country will be a better place.
So I would say, it's important to understand that with philanthropy, it's incredibly competitive. And so the institution that wins in this is going to be really good, and that in itself is a very positive fact. But I think philanthropy is smart money. I think it's people that are putting money to work in a very, very thoughtful place. I'm not trying to say anything negative about governments or how things are spent, but I think philanthropy is targeted, well thought out money, and I think it will continue to have an incredible impact on our society, to give kids more of a chance, to cure diseases, to improve education, to get water to places where there's not water, to cure infectious disease. I mean, I think you will see incredible changes, mostly driven by smart people giving their money to smart places. And I think the future is very bright.
Well, that's a great note to close on, a very hopeful note, and I want to thank you both, thank the Y, and thank all of you for coming out.
Thank you very much.